Welcome to In the Envelope, a podcast from Backstage, the #1 resource for actors and talent seekers. I am your host, Jack Smart, awards editor at Backstage, and I'm here to guide you through every aspect of the entertainment industry with the help of some of your favorite stars. These intimate, inspirational conversations with today's most award-worthy film, television, and theater artists provide you, dear listener, advice on how to live the creative life, personal stories of success and failure alike, and maybe, just maybe, a tantalizing glimpse in the envelope.
I like to see it as empowering the actor to get to a place where this feels effortless. Mm-hmm. So what tools does that actor need to get to a place of feeling they can be free in the dialect?
We are designing the dialect, and we are designing that dialect to fit into the contextual elements of the story that's being told.
We are just diving in here. Christine, hi. How are you?
Hi, Jack. I'm great.
So how is New York? How are you on your end?
Well, it's beautiful. We had snow yesterday, which,
right.
Finally beginning to look a lot like the holidays. So that's fab.
That's funny to me. Yes.
And then it's kind of nice today. So I don't know. I'd prefer a little bit of light snow every day in December if I could, but maybe that's just me.
Yeah, it's pretty sunny where I am, so it's good to check in. Hey, we really are an international, basically an international podcast at this point.
I love that. I'm really excited about 2020 being a year where all of these fabulous accents have been on Backstage. We've obviously got your lovely American sound. We've got Jamie. Yes. I'm not sure what region Jamie's even from, but it's just a lovely British sound. Yeah. And Hannah, which is Wales is its own beast.
Absolutely, we just had Hannah. Yeah, Hugh Grant.
Yeah. And then, Hugh, of course, I haven't even got to the guests yet. I'm just, blathering on about all our fabulous Backstage people, And then, of course, there's myself, and I've got the Northern Irish sound, by the way, of living in New York for 14 years. So yeah,
everyone's unique.
So I feel like the dialect conversation, makes a lot of sense.
It totally does. I mean, we've been wanting to do these we've been calling them deep dive episodes on these specific actorly topics. And I think this was, where did this idea come from? It was partially born out of somebody on Team Podcast made an offhand comment that it would be cool to, because this is an audio form, to hear about this aspect of it. But it's also, frankly, because a lot of our readers click on content about dialects.
Yeah, and dialects is such a funny subject because it's so hard to read dialect work, right? Like, you almost have to hear it, you almost have to see it or be in a physical class to be able to learn more about dialect, because there is about IPA, which is the International Phonetic Alphabet. Mm-hmm. So, there is IPA, but I studied it and I can't remember any of it, Jack. But, totally. But we're meant to know about it as thespians. Uh-huh. But it's quite hard to read, it really
just
isn't.
Reading. Yeah.
It's hard to do. So I think maybe it was me. I might have been part of Team Podcast that suggested Dialects because of Hannah, myself, and Jamie.
Yes, I think it was a discussion about, wow, listen to all these beautiful different accents on the podcast. You know what? And then, of course, we attacked it from the angle of dialect coaches. And our two guests today are Barbara Rubin and Jerome Butler, who are pretty accomplished dialect coaches. So, we don't really know, Christine and I, listeners, we didn't really know what we were getting into. And I was kind of winging it with the questions in these interviews because I don't know much about dialect coaching. But that, I think, is kind of the advantage, is that many listeners probably also don't know, right? And so getting the basics of what a dialect coach does is super helpful for the working actor.
I 100% agree. And I think it's one of those, it's kind of two-pronged for me, right? First of all, you never know when you start in the business where you're going to end. And I think that both of these dialect coaches have that story and are multidisciplined artists in that way. They're directors, they're producers, so they're super interesting just to even explore the idea of where your career can go if you have a particular love for something. Jerome and Barbara have a love for dialects and an interest in dialects, and that's what kind of drives them in their career. So I find that super fascinating.
Totally.
And then secondly, as actors, you need to keep on building that skill. And dialects are so intimidating,
I think that's true.
There's General American, and that's one thing. And then there's Cockney, and, everyone can do a bit of that. But, everyone makes fun of Dick Van Dyke for not getting it right. And I think that there's just a wee bit of fear,
Totally.
So I think that it's a fascinating topic to kind of have a wee think about, okay, great. How do I tackle it? How do I get better at it? How do I keep on developing my own skills?
Spot on. Just to say a little bit about, because you mentioned both Barbara and Jerome, they are both dialect coaches, but Barbara is also an experienced director and is currently the associate director, I'm saying currently, for Girl from the North Country, will be on Broadway.
It will be. I believe it is a will be.
Will be again. Yeah.
Right.
And Jerome is a Juilliard school-trained actor. And he has worked with a bunch of they've both worked with really impressive clients, but I wanted to note that Jerome has also worked with Jonathan Pryce, who has been on this podcast, which I thought was kind of fun.
Yeah, and a great podcast. If you didn't get to listen to it, go back and listen to Jonathan. What a fascinating actor.
Totally. That one. And then I would also recommend to listeners to go back and listen to Patrick Stewart from way back when, and Gary Oldman, because both spoke specifically about dialects. This idea that dialects are both tied to geography and also time period, which came up in both of these interviews today. That right there is so fascinating. Christine and I also said we were going to link to 2 Backstage articles to kind of give those who are curious a kind of jumping off point for dialects. One is called 7 Ways to Avoid Failing at Accents, and another is a guide to specifically British accents. Christine, was there anything else we were supposed to touch on?
No, I don't know. I think maybe we could leave you with, sushi chef, mamala.
Totally.
Round the rugged rock, the ragged rascal ran. That's all I remember from acting school, Jack.
Wait, those are really good. I don't even know. Those are like fancy versions of the accent work. Are you supposed to be able to do those in like every different Southern accent? Is that the idea?
No, you're meant to be able to do them at speed. So the idea for some of those little silly ones like sushi chef, it's kind of hard to say fast, but it's one of those that clean up your S's.
I see. Actually training your mouth. Yeah.
Yes, 100%. So like doing a few of the exercises before you start, recording something or going into an audition. That's all part of not necessarily dialect work, but like, vocal warm up, which Barbara definitely, I'm an ex-student of Barbara's. That's another thing that I should probably confess.
Sure.
So Barbara and I have gone back a long way. I may have gone off on a tangent.
Cool. No,
we can cut this off.
No, this is awesome. No, really, thank you for your expertise. Your work as a former actor and someone who actually knows, has actually worked with dialects. This is really valuable. So thank you. Yeah. I think the only thing else to say is, like, listeners, if you, we will be gauging the response to this episode. Like our voiceover deep dives, if this really gets a good response and we want to hear from more dialect coaches from different regions and different perspectives, tweet us, email us, weigh in.
I love that.
Awesome. Okay, thank you, Christine. I think we're going to take a quick break to hear from our sister podcast and then get to first Barbara Rubin and then Jerome Butler.
Fantastic. I'm just going to keep on doing my vocal warm-ups over here. Mamala, mamala, mamala.
Mamala, mamala, mamala.
Hello. This is Jamie, the producer of the podcast, and I just want to take some time to tell you about the sister podcast to In the Envelope, which is VO School. This is a podcast that I produce and host, and it is devoted entirely to voiceover. So if you're looking to get into the voiceover industry, you should check it out. That's VO School, found on iTunes, Stitcher, all the usual places, and it's hosted by me. Each episode covers a different subject, and we go through the business, the craft, the marketing, the blood, sweat and tears that is creating a voiceover career. So check us out, the VO School podcast, available now.
Hailing from South Africa and working as a dialect coach and theater director in New York City, Barbara Rubin has been helping actors incorporate accent work into their craft for years. Her work on TV shows, films, Broadway and off-Broadway, and individual clients including Hilary Swank, Julia Garner, Terrence Howard, and Jennifer Hudson makes Barbara the perfect expert to introduce us to the ins and outs of dialect work. Here's our interview with Barbara Rubin. It's so good to meet you.
It's good to meet you too.
You're in New York, yes?
I am, yeah.
Are you staying safe?
Yes, I think I am.
Indoors?
I hope I am.
Yeah.
Indoors.
Yeah.
Mostly indoors and mostly on, Zoom, Skype, Amazon Chime, and various other,
Amazon what?
So Amazon Chime.
I don't know what that is. Should we?
They have I don't know. They have their own platform. So I just did an Audible. Well, in the summer, at the end of the summer, I did 2 Audible plays that were from Williamstown that are going to be part of the Williamstown's doing their whole season on Audible, and we had to work. It's cool. We had to work on this platform called Amazon Chime.
Oh, I see. Oh, okay. Because it's an Amazon thing.
Yes.
Wow.
So. Yeah.
That's really cool. Williamstown is doing that. And so by working on it, you mean, what were you doing? Were you directing?
No, dialect coaching.
Oh, okay. For these 2 plays. Are they new plays?
For 2. One of them is a new play.
Oh, okay. That's so exciting.
Yeah. It's called the Chonburi International Hotel and Butterfly Club by Shakina Nafak.
Okay.
And
oh my gosh. Yeah.
So big cast and lots of dialects. Actually, there were 2 coaches on it. And it's so fast because they rehearse for a week and then they record at the end of the second week. And so you're kind of coaching on the go and also they're literally recording and then asking for you to give the actors dialect notes immediately. So everybody's listening to this usually very private conversation that happens between the coach and the actor.
Oh, okay. Publicly, basically.
Yeah.
That is so interesting. That sounds like a blend of so many different aspects of the entertainment industry that have now had to, in this crazy year, come together and figure itself out, totally on the fly.
Right. Exactly.
And it sounds like network TV pace, the way you just described it. There's a ton of people involved. They have to move fast and you got to film it all and get it out right away.
Yeah. But so this theater? Is all, it's not, this is all, the Williamstown thing is all Audible. So they're all recordings. So Williamstown gets all of those actors. I mean, most of the actors were going to be part of the Williamstown Festival in the summer.
And instead it's just their voices.
Yeah.
Cool. By the way, thank you so much for joining us because we've never done this before. We want to do these deep dives into different topics of the industry. And of course, we're Backstage, so we've mostly focused on acting. But dialects and dialect coaching are so related to acting. And I definitely think our listeners would probably have lots of questions. So I might ask you some of those questions.
Yeah, for sure.
Because it sounds really fascinating. So first, could I just ask you, I know you said you didn't want to talk about your life story, but what has been your path through the industry? How did you come to pursue dialect coaching?
So it came to pursue me rather than me coming to pursue it. So I studied directing and directed for a while and worked as an associate director. And I grew up and trained in South Africa, where we didn't really ever have budgets for things like dialect coaches in the theater. So as the director, I had to be able to enable or empower actors. And so that was probably where it began. Or it could go further back. I had a Lithuanian grandmother who had a heavy accent. We were constantly trying to sort of teach her how to pronounce things.
That is training in a way. Yeah.
That is training. The country has 11 official languages, so you're hearing like a ton of different things. But it really, I think, it really happened. When I moved to New York, I was working as an assistant director, and I was working with Athol Fugard. And all of his plays are set in South Africa. And of course, we had great dialect coaches, American dialect coaches. But being in the room with him, and the coach coming in so irregularly, he would ask me to sort of give the nuances or help the actors a little along the way. And I think that's really where it started to click for me, that this is something that I enjoy doing. I love working with actors anyway. And so 10 years after working as his assistant director, I sort of became the dialect coach he won like a Lifetime Tony, and they did a revival of Road to Mecca on Broadway. And then he was a legacy playwright at the Signature Theater. And I've worked on all of the plays that they produced for him there. So it was really through that work, I think, that emboldened me.
What were the other notable productions or like points in your career that further solidified this? I know that you were working on a Broadway show just as COVID hit.
Yes, not as the dialect coach, though. I was working as the associate director on that.
Oh, okay.
Yes, and that was a Girl from the North Country.
Cool.
So,
which I wish we could have all, It's a bummer, isn't it?
Yes. Next year, though.
Good. Okay. Good.
Yes. Good. We will be back.
I mean,
yeah. And it's been interesting, actually, because initially when I started doing the dialect coaching work, it was a problem for some people that I was a director. And certainly one of the agents that I spoke to was like, you should never let anybody know that you also direct. And I think that it's actually been super helpful to me, because I understand that relationship between the actor and the director, like, firsthand. And so I know what ground not to tread on. I know what is not my job, you know what I mean? So it's actually, it's worked out well. But lots of theater productions. I think the first, I worked with some celebrities early on who mostly around, South African dialect. So the very first thing I worked on with Hilary Swank was something called Red Dust, where she ended up, as a pre-production coach, she ended up not sort of using the dialect that we worked on, even though she was amazing at it. I worked with Jennifer Hudson, who was playing Winnie Mandela. I've coached Julia Garner. Actually, she's shooting this Anna Delvey project right now. But I met Julia when she was a teenager. And I have, she was getting a lot of British, auditions when she was really young for British things. And she wanted to work on British dialects. And then she kind of came back a little while later, and she'd gotten cast in this independent film called Tomato Red, which was set in the Ozarks. And we worked on that dialect, which ended up being, her sort of template for Ruth in Ozark. Wow. So, but this has been a crazy project because Anna Delvey, she was Russian born, lived and grew up in Germany, kind of created this identity for herself as this socialite, German heiress, but also has created her own kind of accent. It's so weird. She's, you listen to the recording and you're like, what is that? It's such a mix of things. So that was fun.
That is interesting. I hadn't thought of that. The idea that sometimes for dialect coaching, you are dealing with actors playing real people. So somebody like that or Winnie Mandela. So how does listening to the recordings work? And then how do you use those as a template or throw them aside and start from scratch, or both?
A little bit of both, I think. Definitely what we're not aiming for is, documentary style, like this is how the person speaks, like mimic.
Okay. Yeah.
But, it's super helpful like if you're playing somebody like Winnie Mandela, that there's some very identifiable speech patterns or sounds that we're hearing that are the springboard. Julia kind of, she worked with, we did have a recording of Anna herself, and that sends us off into like, what are you hearing? What pops for you? And then how does that come together like in her mouth? So I think one of the things that I loved when I was working with Athol Fugard, he would say to me and to the actors in the room at the beginning of a process, he would say, "Chaps, this is not a documentary." And I love that.
Yeah, because it's a different form. Yeah.
Yeah. And it gives the space for, it can be authentic and it can be a kind of believable fiction. And that's kind of what we're aiming for. So yeah.
That is fascinating, because I think that's true that you, as an audience member, you're not watching a documentary when you're watching a stage show or a movie. So there's an element of suspension of disbelief. And I hadn't thought that applies to accents as well. I'm fascinated by especially actors who have to play singers, and, whether they're lip syncing or whether they're creating it with their own voice. The point is not to, show footage of the person. No, it's an actor playing it, and we all know that. So it sounds like dialects are the same way of almost like the audience is giving the actor a little bit of a grace period, or like a wiggle room in their interpretation, because we want an interpretation, right?
Right, absolutely. And I think we're also interested in that interpretation. So obviously, if it's somebody iconic, you're like, okay, you know what that person sounds like.
Yeah.
But how is this person interpreting? So it's a layer of storytelling, and it's character. Yeah. And I will believe it even if it isn't absolutely, completely, specific to what I hear.
Gotcha.
But interestingly enough, sometimes it has to adjust. In that same film, I was the pre-production coach for Terrence Howard, who was playing Mandela. And a lot of the way that Nelson Mandela spoke, people can't necessarily understand exactly what he's saying because they're not used to hearing him, or, and so there has to be some room in the same way that I remember, this is obviously dating myself, but when the Beauty Queen of Lenan won the Tony, the original company from Ireland was performing it on Broadway. And I remember going to see it and realizing, wow, there was stuff that I was missing, and I wish that I could see it again. I couldn't afford to, but I wish that I could see it again. And I remember these two women discussing the play after, and the one said, "Oh, wasn't it brilliant?" And the other woman said, "It was. I wish I understood more of it." And that was my experience too.
Yeah.
So sometimes it's who's the audience, right? Who's receiving it. And it's not always being created for the people who are the best listeners or interpreters of that dialect.
So you are thinking, it's like your job is also thinking about the audience.
Yes.
And
I would say
making sure
more
in
theater. Yes, definitely.
Okay.
A little bit more in theater because films reaches, so wide. But there are some people who call themselves dialect designers. Like you'll see sometimes the person is not listed as the coach, but as the designer, because there is such a negotiation often with the director, with the writer, sometimes with the actors about what it should be, or if it's too much, if it's too intense. And so sometimes you're really creating a whole world for the project, and it feels like you're designing it as you go along.
Interesting.
Yeah.
That is so interesting. And I don't know how nitty gritty you want to get about what exactly it is you do. And I'm sure each session and each client and each project is, of course, totally different. But I did want to circle back on this idea of what your job isn't, and the notion that you can't step on the director's toes is really interesting, because is it safe to assume then, I'm just guessing here, your job is to not make decisions about the production or about the storytelling in a bigger picture? You can't step on toes in that way.
Absolutely. Not even about, even though I see it as a part of character work, I'm not there to interpret the character.
For the actor, right.
For the actor.
Interesting.
And so I'm not there to guide, where the performance is heading in any way. But often it's a fine line, because, we're talking about who this person is. I think my job is to, I like to see it as empowering the actor to get to a place where this feels effortless. So what tools does that actor need to get to a place of feeling they can be free in the dialect to work, and meaning that they're not working thinking of the dialect. So a lot of it is what does that actor need to know from the point that they arrive at the work, which is always completely individual and unique. It's totally bespoke. Like there isn't a kind of cookie cutter approach, because people have had different training. People have had no training. People have had great training, but sometimes we're bad at phonetics, at IPA, and they come in thinking like, I'm not going to be able to get this because I really sucked at this in drama school.
Psychologically,
yeah. And however, whatever that is, some actors know exactly what works for them and what their process needs to be with a coach, and other actors are still discovering what that is. So it's really about all the tools that I can offer that person to allow them to find that sense of freedom, that sense of like being able to play and not being conscious of it. Yeah.
Sure. Because when a lot of the actors on this podcast have talked about the notion of doing all of the prep work so that when you are on set or on stage, you can be free.
Right.
Which is, that sounds like so is it safe to say that your work is also, at what stage in the character building process is it? Is it the sort of thing where like an actor would want to work with you before learning their lines so that then they can learn the lines in the correct accent?
Also, different actors have different approaches to that. Depends on like what their, sometimes like what their technique is, or yes. And so I have private clients. So there are some actors who would engage me whether the production, had budget or not, or whether there was a coach attached or not. And oftentimes will want sort of an initial session just to kind of get in the world, and then to work on their own and then check back. And it depends on whether it's theater or film, because if I am doing pre-production with an actor and there is great budget, I could work with somebody on and off for like 3 months.
Oh, okay.
And that is a real kind of, that's a luxurious and wonderful period of time to spend.
Maybe that's ideal. Sure.
It would be amazing if that was, but sometimes it's kind of fast and furious.
Yeah.
It's quick, and we've got to kind of dive into it, get into it relatively quickly. Yeah.
But there are always multiple sessions, or is there ever one? Like a one-off session?
A one-off session, usually if somebody is just seeing me individually, like I'm not necessarily part of the production. If I'm hired by a production company or there's usually more than one session.
Gotcha.
But sometimes in the theater, there may be like a big group session. If everybody is in a similar dialect world, there's like an introductory session, and then I may come back and hear an early run through. But in between that time, I'm usually scheduled to work with the actors a couple of times individually. Very short, like half an hour to kind of check in, to offer any guidance, to see where things are, and then to note the run-throughs, when we go into previews or, kind of our dress rehearsals, or sometimes during tech, but usually from dress rehearsal on.
Sure.
So it doesn't add up to a ton of hours for theater, which sometimes can sort of feel a little bit like it freaks some people out, especially if they're new to this, right?
Yeah. Right.
But there is so much access to, the whole world that you're investigating, and so much you can listen to, and so much you can do in between coaching sessions.
Okay. And I should ask you about what those things are too. But I wanted to, so the point about, the point about the dialect coaching is that it's coaching. Like the idea is that that the actor works with you, goes off to do their own thing, time passes, it gets more in their system, more in their process. Then you do it again. And that's preferably over a long period of time, as opposed to a one-off session where you're just doing a tutorial. The point is to finesse and train and finesse and train and finesse and train.
Yes. And to, oftentimes, depending on the comfort level of the actor, sometimes somebody will really nail it after one intense coaching session, like something clicks and it's kind of all there, or it's a similar dialect to something they've worked on. So there are a few changes to be made. Kind of depends on, where we're starting from. When I do audition coaching, some actors will have, a very sort of important audition, and they've been asked for a very specific dialect, and it's a callback, and they want to make sure, that could definitely be a half an hour or 45-minute session, and then you're just running with it. But usually process is an important part of it. And I wish that I could just sort of, wave my magic wand and it would be there. But there generally is a lot of really focused, concentrated, intense work to be able to reach that point of not thinking about it. I always remember going to Kevin Kline came to speak at the Strasberg Institute, and somebody asked him a question about dialects. I was teaching dialects there at the time. And he talked about, he realized something about himself where he was always sitting in a chair working on dialects, and he always felt like he couldn't get it. And then one day he just got up and he realized, if I'm in my body, if I know who this character is with gesture and movement, then the dialect is part of that, and it's so much easier. And that's why I think, for actors, sort of getting to know what works for you, getting to know, and I'm available. Whatever you need, here I am.
Right.
And if you don't know what you need, then if we have the time, a part of what I believe my job is to lead you toward what actually, notice that. It doesn't work for you when you see it visually, but it works when you feel it in your mouth, or when you're listening, or vice versa.
Gotcha. And so the groundwork of being an actor and knowing yourself as a performer, this is part of that. And if you know that you, are visual or physical, then dialect coaching is folded into that process. And you must have worked with actors, as you say, who are not as experienced in their body or in their process and don't quite know yet, which is fine. It just means that there's maybe more of a learning curve. There's a lot of work of being an actor.
Yeah, there is. And also a lot of exploration and play, I think.
Which you need to be freed up in order to really do.
Right.
Right. And then discover more of what works for you.
Yeah.
Totally.
Yeah.
Totally.
So there's some mystery to it as well, I think,
As with all things, even with something like casting or something like vocal, like music, and there's a lot of subjectivity, I feel like, and that goes for dialects too. Sure.
Yes. Yeah.
Can I ask, what do you think are misconceptions about what it is you do? Or maybe you've worked with actors who they go into a session thinking dialect coaching is one thing. What do you wish more actors knew about it?
I think, a little bit that we're here to find what works for you. We're here. It's bespoke. It's based on you. It isn't a magic formula, but there are ways to get you where you need to be. I think some misconceptions are that like if you find a great coach, there's less work you're going to have to do. And I'm not sure that that's true. Obviously, it's great to work with a great coach, but I still feel like, that a lot of that work has got to be, you've got to take that on for yourself. And especially if you're wanting to reach that place where it's integrated, the more you're allowing that to happen as you're working and outside of your coaching sessions, the better. And that could be anything from, listening to a radio station from that part of the world, like when you're getting ready for rehearsal or for coaching, or what how you're kind of dipping in to let that live for you in a way that's very real, both in your mouth, but also kind of you're hearing it, especially if it's a dialect you don't hear a lot of, which with the South African dialects was often, working with American actors, like they have some concept of what it is, which is often something that they've heard, which may be a little stereotype, or it sometimes sounds a little Nigerian, or, there are things that are, that kind of become a part of it that are maybe not in the right world, but there's some take on it. And what it is to let go of that. So I also think it's important to develop that listening skill, which is something you don't have to pay a coach for.
Yeah. And it's something you get to work on your own, and you have to work on your own.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah.
And that answers the question so beautifully about what it is actors can do to kind of lay the groundwork for better facilitate or better incorporating dialect coaching into their process, right? Like I love the idea of listening to audio and really soaking in, like living in the world. What did you say earlier? What is the term? The world of the dialect?
Yeah, like the world of the play or the film, so that you're filling yourself with as much as possible, so that it feels like you can integrate it.
Filling yourself, because often dialects are dictated by geography and even by time. I guess more by geography than by time. Is YouTube a great resource? Like, what are the other great tools like that?
Incredible.
Everybody talks about YouTube. Yeah.
Yeah, YouTube is amazing. I mean, how you research, like a lot of people listen to, they'll look up dialect and they'll try to listen to a coach who's recorded something. And that could work, but more like if your dialect is a specific location and you start to research, like who are people who, are politicians or celebrities or who were born in that place. Sometimes listening to other actors because they've been trained out of what their original dialect may have been, may not be the greatest idea, but who are people who, we could hear interviews of who came from there or who were raised there. So all of like that kind of research, and then films that, were like television series that is filmed in the north of England is going to give you some really amazing stuff to just have there as the palette of what you're working on. So there's a familiarity with not only the sounds, but also the way that language is used and idiomatic speech and slang. And, so however you can immerse yourself. And there's so many resources at the moment. And coaches can guide you there too, but there's a lot, that you can do ahead of time.
Work to do.
Yeah. And also knowing like when you need coaching, I think is important, so that you're obviously not just throwing money away, but that you've done a little bit of work. You've done a little research on your own. You have some thought going in, and also that you're not going into your session either completely exhausted, or you're working on something else and you've just spent, the last 6 hours in another dialect, and you haven't really scheduled time for yourself to clear out and prepare. So all of those things.
That's great. That's great advice. Yeah. And also avoiding stereotypes, as you said earlier, that's of the utmost importance. And I feel like it's like every dialects coach's worst nightmare, and certainly actors' worst nightmare, to capture something that is just inauthentic and just
yeah. I mean, it's tricky because in the beginning, sometimes when the person tries it on for the first time, it's their anxiety. Oh, I sound like the stereotype of an Australian, like crocodile hunter or whatever. No, but this stereotype is often reflecting something that we all acknowledge is part of that dialect itself. So sometimes you kind of have to lean in a little bit before you can pull back and be subtle and neutral. It depends, obviously. So everything I'm saying depends, but sometimes it's helpful to actually so what is the stereotype here? And yes, we don't want to stay there, but what are the sounds that you absolutely associate with this dialect, or the placement, the nasality, the denasality? What are you hearing that makes you go, oh, I sound like the stereotype? That's awful, right? And then it's a place to move. Yeah.
It is almost a jumping off point. And it sounds like the biggest advice maybe is to do it all, try everything. If you're just going on the stereotype, of course you're going to be limited to that. If you just do the radio thing, then there's different colors in the palette of the dialect to paint with. Yeah. Or research with.
Yeah. And, earlier you had mentioned the time period. And even that is up for discussion often. So if you're working on a received pronunciation British RP from the 40s, to our ear right now, with those little R taps and, let me think of an example. All right. Vere. We don't want to pull somebody out of the story and suddenly get them focused on something that's happening in the dialect, right?
Oh, okay.
So sometimes there'll be a conversation about what sounds are just not really, we're not going to include those, even though they may be authentic for the period. Okay. We're going to lighten that, right? Or
it's part of the interpretation thing of the audience is suspending disbelief a little bit already. So yeah.
Right. And then sometimes, in rare cases, a particular sound will actually flip an actor into another dialect. And depending on how much time they have to work on that. So for example, the R in an Afrikaans dialect is round. And I worked with an actor who had just finished a project working in a Scottish dialect. And every time we hit that R, all the vowels, all the Scottish vowels would come in, So we lightened R's and focused on. So yeah, it's so fascinating, what comes up when you start to play around.
Sure. And the more you do it, the more you will be able to be more chameleonic, right? And being able to figure out, is dialect coaching lighting? I hadn't thought of it this way, where lighting is supposed to be something that if you're noticing it in a stage show, then it's probably wrong. It's supposed to be something that is in the background that you're not distracted by. Is that sort of the same idea?
Ideally, I would say probably yes. But in a way, I think what often distracts is when our ear thinks that it's inconsistent, or when we're struggling to understand. I mean, we'll know it's in a dialect, right?
Okay.
And I think there may even be, for some people, a slight anxiety that they're not going to understand everything. And I think that oftentimes I'll talk about, like, working on a play, the establishing the dialect in the first couple of scenes. Once there's a sort of sense of like, okay, this is where we are, then you can really, go all out. But the first, have you ever watched a film where it takes your ears like a little bit of time to adjust, like 5 to 10 minutes or something, where you're like, oh, okay.
And then you don't notice it anymore, right?
And that, maybe less than 5 to 10 minutes. So I think sometimes it can be like that. So probably little more noticeable. But yes, when you're thinking about the dialect as an audience member, unless you're a dialect coach, or what often happens is you're actually from that place where you can't help but notice that particular person, whatever they're doing sound-wise doesn't quite sound.
Yes, which is where that suspension of disbelief comes in again, and like you were saying, any iconic people, we all know what they sound like, but we are also all buying into the idea that we're here to watch this actor perform that person. So.
Yes, exactly. And actually on that point, that I would really love to remind actors not to ask their friends and family what they think of their dialect while they're working on it, because sometimes what happens is they're getting notes from people who are comparing what they usually sound like to what they're hearing, and it's incongruous. And it can sometimes be damaging to younger actors who are, really working hard to believe that they can do this work.
Sure. So,
yes. So beware of who you're getting your notes from.
That's so interesting. Yeah. This is fascinating. It really is. I love hearing your advice echoing other advice we've heard on this podcast, but in this very specific field. Thank you. It's really fascinating. Are there any other pieces of advice that those who've never worked with a dialect coach or those who would like to master a dialect, anything we haven't covered?
Most actors know tongue twisters, right? From their voice classes.
Yes.
And I think that sometimes, even if you want to practice dialects or you're not working on a specific project, so that you've got more under your belt, when you go into an audition and you've listed on your resume that you can do the following dialects, sometimes they'll put you on the spot and say, "Oh yeah, really? Let's hear your Australian dialect."
That's good to know.
Come on.
Okay. Yes.
And, usually if you've worked on an Australian dialect, there was a process around that. You were focused on it. So here you are a year and a half later, and you're just kind of thrown in
a new environment. Yeah.
In a new environment, in an anxiety-provoking environment sometimes. But so things like that, like having some rhymes or tongue twisters or some sentences that I'll often ask people to choose a key sentence that kind of drops them into the dialect as quickly as possible. So if you have those things on your resume, like have some key sentences or know that you can do, Betty bought a bit of butter in your British RP or whatever you need to do in case that comes up. And practice. And the other audition tip that I wanted to throw out is I've noticed a lot of people get incredibly anxious when there is a dialect requirement for an audition. And I think a lot of people feel like they have to spend the money up front and they've not even gotten into a second round yet, because how can they go into the audition? And my take on that is your openness to try it, your willingness to go in there and, do the best you can, is sometimes really valuable and impactful, because when you get the job, the chances are there's going to be something in place for you, a coach or some way of the process that allows you to work on the dialect. So you're not necessarily expected to be perfect, and the people who are auditioning you are not necessarily dialect coaches. No. So anything that you can do to just throw the flavor in, the texture, it doesn't have to be, you don't have to feel like this is your only shot and it's perfect.
Yeah, and that's just a great point too, because as you say, auditions, there's enough stress and anxiety involved already that you're already being prevented from the really freed up place of being able to play and experiment. So in addition to doing all the prep work of learning your lines, do the right amount of work to prepare the dialect without doing the amount of work that's going to freak you out about it.
Yeah, because the chances are it's not the dialect that's going to get you the job. And oftentimes, an actor will say to me, I auditioned for this part, and now they're asking to see me for something else. And it's
Totally.
different dialect. So,
Yeah, interesting. Huh.
Yeah.
This is so cool. Okay, thank you so much, Barbara. This is really fascinating.
Absolutely. I hope there's good stuff that you can use, and feel free to edit out anything that doesn't make any sense. And
okay. Considering this is an audio podcast, it's good to talk about. I think the dialects is a great, area to talk about for that reason. So
great.
Awesome. Thanks so much.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jack.
Jerome Butler supports the artistic processes of working actors in film, TV, and theater, including Jonathan Pryce, Robert Downey Jr., Ellen Burstyn, and more, with dialect coaching and accent modification. Based in New York City and with a background in drama training at the Juilliard School, Jerome is the founder of Dialect Coaches Corner, a website providing online tools for actors, executives, and fellow dialect coaches. Here's our interview with Jerome Butler. Well, Jerome, thank you so much for joining us on this, as I was just saying, this new venture of our podcast. Do you want to introduce yourself to listeners? Kind of, what would you say your title is, first of all?
Well, first of all, Jack, I'm so happy to be on your program and, reach your listeners.
Yeah.
I've been listening to your podcast. You've got
That's so nice.
Fantastic people on it. It's a font of information. It's an incredible wellspring of the hearts and minds of some of the most talented human beings on the planet. And it's really wonderful. So I'm honored to
Thank
be
you so
with
much.
you today.
So happy to have you.
Thank you. I would call myself a dialect coach.
Mm-hmm.
I also teach, and I would also say accent modification is something that I also do as well.
Cool. Yeah. And those are all, there's a lot of overlap between those things.
For sure.
Cool. Because on your website, it says dialect/accent/speech tools. And there's, you work a lot with network studios and corporations, correct?
Yes.
In addition to private individual clients, including actors.
Right.
So
cool. I'm really, I have a lot of balls in the air at any given time. A lot of balls in the air. Right now is a great example. I'm working on a show. So I'm working on set 5 days a week. I'll meet with other actors on other projects that I'm prepping after we wrap, and on weekends. I'll also see private clients during those times. An actor, if somebody wants to prep an audition, or ongoing accent modification work that I might have with an actor who's from, who's not from the United States and wants to be more comfortable with playing, a role with a general American accent.
I see.
And then there's people who are wanting to do accent modification, and then there's constant expanding work on the resource website, Dialect Coaches Corner, where we try to provide resources for actors, for teachers, linguists, and individuals who are wanting to transform the way they communicate through accent modification. So there's a lot going on.
Okay. And so take me back to the beginning. I mean, how did you end up in this path? Like, first of all, where are you from? What is your background in the industry?
I was trained as an actor
Mm-hmm.
in the drama school program. I went to the Juilliard School,
Mm-hmm.
and very soon after I graduated, I started teaching as a job in between acting gigs. And I taught acting, I taught voice and speech. I had experiences in a variety of settings. I taught inside of training programs. I taught at the Massachusetts Institute, of Technology, MIT, I should say for short. Taught inside of prisons. Taught conflict resolution improv inside of prisons.
So
taught
cool.
at LACSA out there in Los Angeles County High School for the Arts. Great program, and that's pretty much what I did a lot of.
Mm-hmm.
And I knew people who were working as dialect coaches on film and television sets, and at some point, I started saying yes to those opportunities. And, like I always like to say, whatever you say yes to consistently, positive or negative, in 5 years, that's exactly where you'll be. And
that goes for career and life.
That goes for career and life,
Yeah.
for sure. And I've been saying yes for, I'm going on 20 years here. So
That's awesome.
It's been a wonderful, wonderful journey.
Sure. Well, and would you say are there innate qualities that, in addition to, of course, saying yes in a way that then your career path is forged in this way, are there innate qualities that somebody who's good at dialects or dialect coaching has?
I think that once you have, experience, you got to have a good ear.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that's something that a lot of actors have.
Sure.
But once you have experience in listening and breaking down dialects, I mean, there's a certain kind of muscle memory that gives you the ability to pick up others. And really, I'm talking about actors as well as dialect coaches.
Mm-hmm.
But, I wouldn't say that necessarily makes the process any easier.
Mm-hmm.
If you're playing Hamlet, and it doesn't matter how successful your production was, if you're going to play Hamlet again 5 years later, you're going to have to do the whole thing all over again. And, you may remember little speeches, they may stay in there, but, for the most part, you're going to be building that doggone performance from scratch again.
Yeah.
And in fact, that's what you want to do.
Yes.
You don't want to repeat the same Hamlet. You actually you're doing it again because you have a fresh take on it, and so I think, innate qualities for a dialect coach, I think, are curiosity and, a dogged determination to look at things as they are and try and hear things as they are, as opposed to what your idea of them may be.
Mm-hmm.
Because the way people communicate are always changing, and there's a real tendency and a danger to say, oh, well, I know what a French accent is. And I know what a Southern accent is. Well, do you? And who's speaking the Southern accent? Who's speaking the French accent?
Right.
Where are they from? What part of the world are they from? Where they're from, how has that been affected by the ideas of colonialism or empire?
Oh, sure. History.
So it's history, yes.
Time.
Yeah. So the way a person speaks says volumes about where they came from.
Sure. And curiosity is such an integral part of that. Like as an actor, being curious in general is, I think, it should be part of the job description. And as you're saying, that can include how a person speaks and like why they speak that way is what you're saying.
Yes. Yeah.
That's so cool.
Yeah. And at the same time, of course, we're not doing a dissertation. Nobody cares about that. You know, we're telling a story. And as Denise Woods, the wonderful dialect coach and speech trainer, likes to say, the story is the star.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I'm curious too about as your background as an actor and how that affects this, because speaking to Barbara Rubin, her background was more in directing. And she actually talked about this idea that she had to avoid directing actors when she's working with them and think of them as slightly different hats. And like, but she also echoed what you just said, that the story is that's always kind of the main factor. It is not your job, nor would you want to control what an actor's doing, right?
Right. I'm following the actor.
You're following the okay.
I'm following where the actor wants to go. Ultimately, when push comes to shove, I'm following the path that actor is on, because that actor is going to know way more than me about who the character is, why they're saying things, you know, how it wants to be, because they're the one exploring it. I am completely on the outside. I am never anything more than an outsider to say, well, you know, you may not want to go over there. There are rocks over there. And there seems like there's a whole lot of fertile ground this way. Try that. And that's all I'm doing.
Yeah.
And I'm using what the actor wants to bring out to help them discover. That's what I'm doing. So I'm asking them a lot of questions about, well, what do you think about, you know, what do you think about this? And what do you think about how that may happen? What do you want what do you want to portray when in terms of the way the person is speaking? And however they express that, then I learn things about tonal qualities, about rhythm, you know, pace, any sort of things having to do with prosody, you know, how the voice is connected to a thought process, those kind of things.
Okay.
And the one thing I will say, I don't want to interrupt your next question.
No, yeah.
That ultimately I'm wanting that actor to have 6 ways to Sunday. I don't want them to have one way to do anything.
Yeah.
So I am constantly saying, well, what if you did it like this? What if you? What would it sound like if you did it like that? What if you made this the operative word? Because sometimes, and increasingly, these days, I'm not going to be there on the day.
Yeah.
I want you to have as many ways that are comfortable for you to go, so you can let your imagination pick the one that's appropriate.
Yeah.
You know, at the time, I have no idea how they're going to stage the scene. I don't know.
Right. You're providing multiple options toward a solution, towards solutions, rather than you are providing a solution.
Well put.
Well, and it just
use that.
You could absolutely use that. Well, and it's all over your website too, this notion of speech tools. The idea is that you are equipping these people with tools rather than answers.
Yes. Yeah, for sure. For sure.
And as a Juilliard trained actor, it also just sounds like, I mean, I love this idea of following the actor because you understand the basic premise of what an actorly process is, but it also sounds like so much of your job is then understanding and trying to figure out each individual actor that you're working with, their process.
For sure. For sure. And how to stay out of their way when necessary, how not to get in the way.
Okay.
And having been an actor, you know, I mean, I'm sensitive to that. One of the biggest things, you know, when you're that people who aren't actors don't understand and perhaps can miss is that good actors make it look easy, and it's never easy.
It's never easy.
No, it's never easy. No. They make it look like, oh, well, I could do it like this and I can do it like that. And, it's like, no. This choice that was made is a highly crafted, structure that we have. Me actually getting up, walking over to that chair and picking up my suitcase and then, grabbing the water and chugging it before I go out the door. There's a lot of thought that goes into that. Right. I can't, it's like, and then if you ask me to, change the order of that, well, I can't just do that on a dime. I mean, I can't always do it on a dime. Sometimes I may be able to, but it's like, it's an illusion, and illusions are constructed.
Mm-hmm. Right. The thing about acting is there's about a zillion choices that an actor, if you look at it one way, has to make, and if you look at it another way, gets to make. Yes. And dialect is not just one of those zillions of choices. It sounds like there's quite a few factors in just if you were to zero in on the dialect part of it alone.
But in terms of the whole structure, in terms of what an actor needs to be focused on, in terms of bringing something to life, it's one element. It's one element. And one of the things that's really wonderful about being on a film set, you start looking at what all the preparation that every department does, it just blows your mind. I was in the makeup room one day, it's years ago, and was looking at the books that the makeup people create, because, there were fights in the show. And so they had books. And it's like, on this day, the scar is going to look like this. And as the movie progresses, the scar is going to have to change as it heals. And I'm saying, oh, man, that's, I never thought about that.
Absolutely.
This is the thing also when you're putting together, because look, when I am working with an actor, we are designing the dialect. That's what's happening.
Design.
Right? Yeah. For sure, we are designing the dialect, and we are designing that dialect to fit into the contextual elements of the story that's being told. And that differs if it's a madcap comedy or a rom-com or a heavy drama, with a lot of explosions and that sort of thing. Or, I mean, there are requirements that the story has that are contextual. And
gotcha.
You're wanting to make sure. There's an old adage in the theater. It's called, or it goes, if it don't show, don't paint it.
Oh, okay.
If it's not going to be on stage, don't mess with it. Don't spend any time working on it. If it's not going to be a part of what is going to make the illusion work, then you're wasting your time. You want to make it safe and make the illusion work. Now, it's trickier for an actor because an actor does do research that is a part of this, this sort of foundation.
Totally.
But every actor who is good at their job knows at what point, okay, I got enough. I have enough. I have enough research. Okay, that part of it's done. Yeah. Now I'm focusing on this.
On the doing of the,
Yes, on the doing of it. And if I need to know something else, then, then we'll figure that out, as we go.
Yeah. And so you've worked with actors at every stage of that process, including you've worked with people on their auditions, not even people who have a role. You work with audition coaching, correct?
Yes.
Is that different in any way from prepping an actor who already has a role, or?
Yeah, it is different. It is different. I mean, when you're prepping somebody for an audition, what you're really trying to do is just get to the next level, to the next stage.
Okay.
you're trying to provide a resource so that that actor can show themselves at the best advantage. And, if they get the call back, well, then, hey, you may get some feedback that says, let's do this with the dialect.
Gotcha.
Or they may not say anything about the dialect. When you get the job, that's when you actually, if you've needed a coach for the audition, when you get the job, you probably will want a coach there as well.
Yeah, probably the same
thing.
Coach.
Get the job, the job first. And the point is, it's all about having them be interested in what you have to offer. And an audition is the same way as, that movie that, we plunked down our $18 to see. You want to create an illusion of the best representation of you and that character as possible. And sometimes you'll go to a coach. I have people come to me and says, I think I understand this dialect, but I'll just feel better if I go over it with you for an hour before I go in. Sometimes it's an actor who will come to me every time they have a big audition because they have a dialect modification that they're working on because they weren't raised in America, right? And if they're going up for an American role, then they'll come to me to do that. Sometimes it's actors who I have an ongoing relationship with because I started working with them, when they first came to the States to get jobs. I have several actors who have a career who first came to me because they were trying to just get their American accents together.
Okay.
And some of those relationships are going on 10 years,
Amazing.
You said it earlier. It's all about finding tools to solve an issue. And what's interesting for me is I have never, which is why I like the business, I've never really been interested in long-term, ongoing training with people who weren't working.
Okay.
I like it when an actor comes to me because they know they need me for this specific thing. And otherwise, I'm out of mind.
Yeah.
Do you see what I mean? In other words, what I'm saying is they're not coming to me on the regular like they would go to an acting class because that's kind of not quite what my tool is like in the way that I use it.
Yeah. It is more specific to each job.
Yes. And each task. And what I am really interested in, and during this pandemic, I had a chance to really dig deeply into that. I am interested in doing workshops where it's like, okay, this is a 3-class, 4-class workshop in talking about this particular aspect of dialect acquisition.
Okay.
So that what begins to happen is that, which is what I always believe when it comes to actors, you need to be the best expert on what your process is and what it is that you need. You need to be the expert on that.
Of your process. Yeah.
Absolutely. So if I can help you.
Definitely not the same for every
It's not the same. And if I can help you solidify that for you, when you do come to me, then we have a way of working.
Okay. I see. And that is what makes it different from an acting class where, of course, actors should be, whenever they're not working, they should be training because that's for the purpose of honing that artistic process. But you're saying you come in when you come in to aid that process, and preferably with actors who really know intimately their own process.
Yes. And oftentimes it's been because I have been a part of working that out with them.
So cool, right? For these long-standing, is it safe to call them clients? Is that the right term?
Yeah, I would say so. Yeah.
Because some of them are, first of all, some of them are very big names, But it does sound interesting to me, this idea of like working with an actor on one job throughout the course of that job sounds very cool. But then to keep working with that actor on a variety of different characters and roles over the course of sometimes decades, that sounds really fascinating.
It's been really interesting because the things that come up have a kind of an additive, quality to them. One thing stacks on top of another.
Cool.
So, and I don't know what's gonna happen next,
Yeah.
And it's kind of interesting to see that process. I've said before that I admire actors, and that I feel privileged to work with them and be a resource for them. But I'm always struck by the focus that individual actors have that is specific to them, but has to do with how they deal with things that every actor deals with.
Right.
For example, how different actors deal with script management.
Okay.
How actors deal with, if I'm working with an actor on a television series and they've got massive amounts of dialogue on a regular basis
To memorize.
How they actually deal with that process to make sure that it happens, efficiently, right? Cool. And one of the things that I often think, and sometimes will say, is that the difference between a professional and an amateur is a professional can perform at an excellent level or to an excellent standard when they're not at their best.
Okay.
So if they're sick, if they're tired, they can do that. They could pull that rabbit out of the hat because of their because of the training, the commitment, and because of how they've set it up in the first place.
I've never heard it put that way about professional versus amateur. Like I've heard this idea that actors and artists in general, the point is to work all the time or every day, like in a variety of different circumstances, so that you can know what it's like to work when you are sick or when you are having a bad day, and you can kind of push through. And I've never heard it that like that is what separates the people who are really committed and really good to apart from the people who are not as familiar with that process and just starting out. They don't know how to excel when they're having a really terrible day.
Or they just don't know how to repeat it.
Oh.
Let's take golf as an example, right? Somebody goes out to the golf course and then they hit this great drive and it's like it's fantastic, and it's like you say, "Oh boy, I think I've got talent in this." And then they go and they hit the next shot and it goes, 5 feet.
Yeah.
Or the next drive goes into the woods. There's not an ability to recreate a perfect stroke.
Interesting.
Which is what's required to at least give yourself the option of having a good result.
Gotcha.
And that perfect stroke only results from hours and hours and hours, maybe 10,000 of practice.
Yes, of regular practice. Yeah.
Yeah.
Totally. I actually think a really good takeaway from this conversation is that this stuff is really hard.
It is really hard. Chiwetel Ejiofor once said, "It just comes by hours of beating your head against a stone wall." Yeah. That's part of what it takes. Just a dogged determination to try and just going back to it over and over and over and over again. Every musician will tell you the same thing. And because of that commitment, I really try and over-deliver for people. I mean, I'll bend over backwards to get you the resources I need that you need. And oftentimes what it results or how it manifests itself is that, I'm just constantly thinking about what are some of the things that I might be able to do that might be able to move the needle, that might be able to shake things up for this person. I'm thinking about that all the time.
Yeah.
And so consequently I have a lot of approaches, a lot of devices in my toolbox, because everybody's different. Everybody learns differently. Everybody approaches things differently, and what works with this person may not work the same way for that person. And
and you learn more from every single job, and can then cherry pick and bring old lessons to new roles, new work.
Yes. Yeah. No, that's very well put, dude. You are creating. That's another slogan. We've picked a lot of cherries.
Yes. Well, gosh, Jerome, thank you so much. This is all so interesting and so refreshing for me to talk about something this, I want to say niche, like this specific. Is there anything else that our working actor listeners should know? I mean, what other advice do you have for those who are looking at potentially getting dialect coaching or going into their first dialect coaching session?
That's a big question, and I'll try to be as specific as possible. I mean, the big thing that an actor can do is familiarize yourself with what the issues are when it comes to the way speech sounds are organized. And if you just want to take English, take a look at a vowel chart, and you could come to my website, dialectcoachescorner.com, and learn some things about that. And there are a lot of resources, on YouTube, which will also give you. But if you could demystify that for yourself, even a little bit, speaking to the actors out there, when you and I get together, then we can move that much further faster.
Gotcha.
Because now I can talk to you and say, all right, so in this particular accent, here's what happens with the front vowels. This vowel and this vowel switch. And then with the back vowels, this sound moves forward, and you already have a sense of what I'm talking about. And it doesn't mean that you have to become an expert in the International Phonetic Alphabet. But if you could learn that in English, sounds are in categories, and we could use those categories to leverage our way into different dialects, then you're way ahead of the game.
Yeah. Okay. Familiarize with the basics for sure. And we'll definitely link to Dialect Coaches Corner, because it looks like, what is this? This speech app looks like a very valuable resource.
The speech app is absolutely amazing. The speech app would allow you to go in, take a piece of text, and put that text into the app, and then have it arranged in any categories you wanted to. So if you knew that in this particular dialect, these vowels changed, then you could put it through the app, and the app would basically show you all the words that in that category that would change. So it's a focusing tool. There's another part of the app that allows you to mark up your text according to sounds. So if you want to mark all of the aw sounds, as in law, if you're doing a New York accent, then you could say mark all the aw sounds. So there's a lot of different ways in there that allow you to massage the data so that you can actually look at it and then do the work that you've worked out, sometimes with a coach.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. These sounds like really good resources for doing the work. These are for working actors.
Yes. Actors who are actually working to create something. And in this day and age when it's never been easier to create content, the idea of having places where you could go to help you on a budget manage things like dialects and how to manipulate some of those things, that's really crucial.
Yeah.
Really, really important.
Excellent.
Yeah. Adding things all the time also.
It's additive. Like you said, it's an additive process.
But it's been really awesome to be able to talk with you. Like I say, I am I am honored to be on your program because I may not be a heavy hitter, but I got a chance to get up at bat, and that's real cool.
No, it's really been, this is so great, Jerome. Thank you. And now it's time to hear from Christine McKenna-Torella, our Backstage casting insider. I will let her take it away.
On to the casting calls for this week, and I'm keeping with the theme of dialects and voiceover and highlighting some of the best stuff we have on the site at the moment. Liz Lou's Casting is running a voiceover casting seeking talent for a new animated series. It'll be a work-from-home opportunity. Primarily, they're looking for talent in either New York or LA. They're seeking children to sound around the age of 6 years old, and it's paying SAG scale for the project. Secondly, there's a branched content commercial voiceover. The applicants must have their own voice recording equipment for this position because it will be work from home and it needs to be professional grade when you record. And they're seeking British accents from London in particular. And finally, I want to highlight a large animation video project for the educational market. It is animations to help teach English to non-English speakers. They are seeking a variety of accents. I'll just highlight a few of them. They're seeking South African, Polish, German, and French. Take a look if you have a specialty of an accent. It might be there for you for that casting. As always, break a leg in all of your auditions and have a beautiful week.
In the Envelope is recorded at Lotus Productions and Hyperbolic Audio in New York City, and Soundbox LA, Mark Grouse Studios, and Buzzies in Los Angeles. Thanks as always to our producer extraordinaire, Jamie Muffett, and to the team at Backstage, Samantha Sherlock, Mark Stinson, Caitlin Watkins, and of course, Kasey Howe. Visit Backstage.com, and don't forget, you can subscribe to Backstage by using the code ENVELOPE at checkout for a free trial. That's right, 100% free. For more exclusive content, join us on Facebook and Twitter at In The Envelope, and subscribe, share, and leave a comment. Who would you like us to interview next? Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you next time for another glimpse in the envelope.